Nobody noticed it happening. Not the farmers watching their coins become worthless copper slugs. Not the merchants watching trade routes dissolve. Not the soldiers watching their commanders get murdered one after another. 26 emperors in 50 years, almost all of them assassinated by their own men. They just noticed things getting a little harder, year after year. A slightly worse harvest. A slightly emptier treasury. A slightly more nervous senate. And then one day in the year 476, a 16-year-old boy was sitting on the throne, and a Germanic general walked in and quietly told him it was over. No siege. No dramatic last stand. Nobody showed up. Every word of what you just heard is true, and every word of what you were taught about the fall of Rome is wrong. Because half the empire didn't fall that day. It kept running for another 1,000 years. A Roman emperor was still on the throne when Columbus was a teenager. He died in 1453, sword in hand, the same year the 100 Years' War ended. The Roman Empire outlasted the Middle Ages. And the question isn't, why did Rome fall? It's why did one half survive while the other rotted from the inside? You've probably heard some version of the story. Barbarians swept in. They sacked the city. They destroyed civilization. 476 AD. The end. Maybe a movie showed it to you that way. Maybe a textbook squeezed the whole thing into a single dramatic paragraph. That version isn't exactly wrong. It's just describing the last 5 minutes of a death that took 300 years. It's like saying someone died of a stubbed toe because that's what happened while they were already bleeding out from everything else. The real collapse wasn't a military defeat. It was political chaos, economic self-destruction, and an empire that stopped believing in itself, all rotting quietly while everyone was looking the wrong way. The barbarians didn't kill Rome. They walked through doors that were already wide open. To understand how far Rome fell, you have to understand how high it was. And it was very, very high. For 200 years from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, Rome looked invincible. One currency from Britain to Egypt, roads still in use today, trade routes stretching from Spain to India and China. A citizen could travel from Hadrian's Wall to the Nile without crossing a hostile border. This was the Pax Romana. It felt permanent. It felt inevitable. And that's precisely why the collapse, when it came, took everyone by surprise. Because nobody in 180 AD, watching the empire at the peak of its wealth and power, thought it would be gone in 3 centuries. The cracks didn't appear on the borders, they appeared where nobody was looking. Here's a number that should stop you cold. In a single 50-year period, 235 to 284 AD, Rome had at least 26 emperors. Most were assassinated, some ruled for weeks. One was killed by his own guards after days because he tried to enforce basic discipline. Imagine a company going through 26 CEOs in 50 years, and almost every single one of them being murdered by their own staff. That was Rome's government. This was the crisis of the 3rd century. The empire was attacked on 3 fronts simultaneously. Germanic tribes across the Rhine, the Persian Empire in the east, and raiders throughout the intervening regions. Every frontier commander with enough legions thought, why shouldn't I be emperor? Civil war became the norm. The Roman state was eating itself, one assassination at a time, while its enemies watched and waited. Being emperor stopped being the most powerful job in the world. It became a death sentence with a palace attached. But while soldiers were murdering emperors, something much quieter was destroying the foundation of Roman life. And nobody was watching. The denarius was Rome's standard silver coin. Under Augustus, nearly pure silver, about 3.6 grams. Solid. Trusted from Britain to Syria. But wars cost money. When the crisis hit, expenses exploded while the tax base was carved up by rival generals. The emperors found a shortcut. They debased the currency, melted the same silver into more coins. Less silver per coin, same face value. Then do it again, and again. By the 260s, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. A coin that had been mostly pure silver was now a copper slug, its coating rubbing off in your pocket. The result? Hyperinflation. Prices became meaningless. Barter returned. Trade networks collapsed. Farmers abandoned their land because paying taxes in worthless currency made farming a losing proposition. Soldiers demanded higher pay just to keep up with prices, which pushed the government to debase the coin even further to afford it. It was a spiral with no exit. The Roman state was destroying its own money. You can't run an empire when your currency is a lie. One man tried to save Rome. His solution worked, for a while. But it also drew a line down the middle of the empire, becoming a death sentence for one half and a lifeline for the other. In 284, Diocletian seized power and made a radical decision. The empire was too big for one man. He created the tetrarchy rule by 4. 2 senior emperors, 2 juniors. It was practical, it bought time, but it made official what had been true for decades. East and West were on completely different trajectories. The Eastern Empire had Constantinople impenetrable walls, direct access to the Silk Road, and the wealthiest provinces: Egypt, Syria, Asia Minor. These were the economic engines. The West got Italy, Gaul, and Britain. Harder to defend, more exposed, and nowhere near as wealthy. Plus, all the borders that were most expensive to protect, with a fraction of the resources to protect them. Diocletian bought the empire time, but he also wrote a death sentence for the western half, while quietly setting up the eastern half to survive everything that was coming. The Goths didn't come to destroy Rome. They came because something worse was chasing them. The Huns were pushing westward from Central Asia, fast, violent, and terrifying. Entire peoples, Goths, Vandals, and Alans, fled into Roman territory not to conquer, but to survive. This was a refugee crisis, not a coordinated military assault. Tens of thousands of people, including women and children, showed up at the border begging to be let in, and Rome's response was so catastrophic, it's hard to read. Corrupt Roman officials exploited them. They sold rotten food at extortionate prices. Families traded children into slavery for dog meat. Treaties were signed, then broken. The Goths were starved, humiliated, and pushed past the breaking point. They didn't just get angry, they organized, armed themselves, and marched on the very empire that was supposed to be protecting them. In 410, the Visigoths under Alaric sacked Rome. The city that hadn't been breached in 800 years fell. Not to an invading army bent on destruction, but to refugees the empire itself had mistreated into enemies. It was a self-inflicted wound dressed up in someone else's uniform. Here's a question. What happens when an empire can't convince its own citizens to defend it? Rome found out. By the late 4th century, centuries of civil war and economic collapse had destroyed trust in the state. Military service meant years away, brutal conditions, and pay in coins nobody believed in. Why sign up? So the empire did the logical thing. It hired Germanic mercenaries to fill the ranks. At first, this worked. But over time, the army became less Roman in every sense that mattered. Generals were Germanic. Loyalties were personal, owed to a commander, not patriotic, owed to Rome itself. When Alaric marched on Rome in 410, many of the soldiers who were supposed to defend the empire either stood aside or joined him outright. Their loyalty had never really belonged to Rome in the first place. An empire that can't get its own people to fight for it is an empire that's already lost. No matter how large its territory still looks on a map. Everything I just described, the political chaos, the currency collapse, the hollow army, the migration crisis, was the western half. The half centered on Rome. The half that fell. The eastern half? It survived for another 1,000 years. And nobody talks about why. Constantinople kept going. Roman law kept evolving. Roman administration kept functioning. The gold solidus, a coin so stable it remained the international currency of the Mediterranean for 700 years, kept trade flowing. The people of the Eastern Empire never called themselves anything other than Romans, right up until the very end. When the West collapsed in 476, the East didn't blink. So when people say Rome fell in 476, they're telling you half the story. The empire didn't fall, it split. One half died a slow, self-inflicted death. The other half lasted. Until 1453, when Ottoman cannons finally breached the walls of Constantinople, and Constantine XI, a Roman emperor, died sword in hand defending his city. The same year, the 100 Years' War ended. The same lifetime as Columbus. The Roman Empire outlasted the Middle Ages. The fall of Rome isn't a date. It's the wrong question. The right question is, why did one half survive? Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Every failure that killed Rome has a modern translation. And we're doing all of them right now. Currency debasement that destroyed trust in money. Political instability so severe that leadership became a revolving door of assassinations. An empire that couldn't recruit its own citizens to defend it. A split that left one half with the wealth and the other half with the problems. Every one of those has a modern equivalent. A currency that people stop believing in. Political systems too busy fighting themselves to solve actual problems. Institutions that lose the loyalty of the people they serve. Rome, at its peak in 180 AD, looked invincible. Nobody thought it would be gone in 300 years. The people living through the slow decline rarely even noticed it. They just noticed things getting slightly harder, year after year, until one day the emperor was a teenager. Nobody bothered to defend. Surface strength hides internal decay. It always does. This is the history that matters, not the textbook version, not the barbarians destroyed civilization version. The real one. Complicated, uncomfortable, and way more instructive than anything you learned in a classroom. Because the people who don't understand why Rome fell are the people most likely to repeat the same mistakes. And the mistakes Rome made? We're making all of them right now. If that's the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. We're going to keep pulling at the threads. The official story is rarely the real one.